Hello, my name is David Cardenas. I am the Associate Dean in the College of Hospitality, Retail, and Sport Management. It's great to be with you guys, and I'm going to give it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Ducate. I'm the Faculty Executive Director for the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning, and I'm also a professor in German and languages, literatures, and cultures, and where I led study abroad for almost 20 years. So happy to be here to represent both of those hats today.
Great, and I am Jenna Reese-White, and I am the Global Collaborations Manager for the Education Abroad Office. My role includes working with our faculty and staff who lead courses abroad, and I support and communicate with them to build our successful programs. And I just want to thank all of those of you who joined our last session, What is a GLE? I'm going to go ahead and do a quick review for those of you who haven't had the chance to review that session. So before we dive in today, I'm just going to go over what was talked about last time. So if you didn't have the chance to review our session, I'm just going to take a quick second here to post in the chat, and this is also available on our Blackboard. This is the link to our last recorded session. I mentioned our Blackboard, so I'm going to go ahead and post that link as well. So just to be clear, that first link is the last recorded session, What is a GLE, the first in this mini-series. And then that second link is if you do not yet have access to our Blackboard. If you requested access last time, you should now have access through Blackboard, and it's an organization instead of a course. So in the last session, we had a quick visit with Elizabeth Koenig from Italy at Banfi Winery. And we also went through the 360 tour that Banfi Wineries offers. We dove into a brief historical view of virtual programming over the past 10 or so years with the SUNY State University New York system in COIL programming, and then more recently at our own university. We discussed requirements of a global learning experience, or a GLE, and what the pilot course looked like in May. We discussed other universities supporting virtual experiences and how they compare with what we are doing now. We went over the student benefits of GLEs, and we discovered partners on and off campus that can support you in building your GLEs along with those resources that we have in Blackboard. So in addition to today's session, we also encourage you to attend the final session on November 20th, and it will be a hands-on workshop for building your own GLE syllabus. So for today's session, we're going to go over departmental expectations for GLEs, which David will cover for us. And we're also going to dive into the requirements for GLEs specifically and what those look like. And so Laura will guide us for the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning, or CL, requirements. I'll also go ahead and cover those processes as well. And then finally, the proposal process and timeline in which you should submit a GLE. And just to reiterate, there is one more required session. You can see the badge up here in the lower right-hand corner. That is what you can go ahead and put in your signature, in your email, or on a professional web page at the end of the next session, as long as you have attended all three. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to David.
Thanks, Jenna. It's nice to be invited to talk to you guys a little bit about the process that we have in the College of Hospitality, Retail, and Sport Management. It's a little intimidating because I'm really not the expert. Magdalena and Karen and Christina and Jenna really are the ones and Sandy Strick really are the experts. But I'll like to talk a little bit about the departmental approval for faculty-led programs. Just overall, it's standard for all courses. We treat very similar to what we do for traditional courses. It starts with the faculty. Faculty-led. It's guided by the faculty. They propose it. They come up with the idea. And we believe that this is the most sustainable approach and also the best way to make sure that it's connected back to the mission and the objectives of that department. So that's how it starts. We want them to be the one to propose it. Again, if it's a traditional course or a faculty-led program, we want them to do it, because if there's not buy-in by them, and there's not and they don't want to do it, then it's not going to be long-standing. It's not going to be meaningful to the students. So it's a faculty-led program. And with that said, in our college, it has to be initiated by the faculty member, and then the departments have to talk about it during their department meetings. This has to be voted on. Again, just very similar to a traditional course. If they want to propose a new course, so if they want to propose a new accounting course or a new finance course, it's the same process for a faculty-led program. Once it's approved, then it goes on to the department or the school. The department chair then gets to decide for our two examples. We have one department, the Department of Retailing, and then the other one is the School of Hotel, Restaurant, Tourism Management. But the process is very, very similar. The department chair, the school director, determines if what's being proposed meets the goals of the unit. Then one of the things that's that they look at is, do we have the resources? What's the cost going to be? One thing that they look at is there any duplication between what one unit does versus another? Specifically for faculty programs, is there duplication in the region? So, for example, if one person's going to go to Italy and in Rome, and the other one's going to go to Florence, are we pushing people apart? And so we want to make sure that there's not any duplication. If it's approved at the departmental or the school level, then it comes to my office, and I kind of review the same thing. Not only do I want to make sure it matches the departmental goals, I want to make sure that it matches the college goals. Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right facilities for it? Do we have, and then, again, we don't want necessarily a retail study abroad going into the same region. We also want to make sure that all faculty have the ability to do this if this is what they want to do. And we also, unfortunately, have to make sure that the faculty member is equipped and able to go. Some faculty members just don't have the ability to go, and/or we would want them to go based off of, for example, a new assistant professor. We don't necessarily want them to be leading a faculty-led program, so we would recommend them to work on their tenure first and then lead faculty-led programs. And then if I approve it, it goes to the dean, and then he looks it over to make sure there's anything that he or she may have any questions about. And really what the dean does is, if any mediation. So let's say that the department chair rejects it, and I approve it, or vice versa, then he's going to look back to figure out, well, he or she is going to figure out what needs to be done. So he's more of the mediator factor, and that's kind of what happened in our example that we're going to be talking about. So again, the departmental approval, very similar to traditional courses. It has to go from the chain of command. I mean, we want it to start at the grassroots all the way up. It's got to start at the grassroots, but it's got to have approval at all the different SEs. So that's how we do it. And what happened this in the spring was a pretty quick process. So I'll talk a little bit about that in my next example. I think that's my next slide. I think. All right. So for the departmental approval for what happened this summer, again, very similar. We want it to be faculty led. We want it has to go through an approval process. The biggest difference between a global classroom and GLEs is that there's additional layers that have to be done, and that's kind of why, or at least my office looks into it. We work very closely with our business manager and our CFO, looking to see if the budget's right, the contracts are right. It was even more important this last semester in spring when we were looking at that on, how is that contract written? What are our out clauses? What's the safety and security process? So we don't necessarily do that for a finance course, but we definitely do that for a global class or a global classroom. So we look at that process, and the one big difference that is that it goes to our business manager. Our business manager is very much involved in these courses. As students are paying, we're spending money out. We've got to make sure that we've got have really good contracts. So those are the similarities and the difference. So specifically, what happened last spring is that we had two experienced faculty members, and I think they're both here, so they can definitely chime in and they can talk a little bit more about the process. They probably see it from a different lens, but so two very experienced faculty members are going to be taking two different classes to the same location. It was a luxury management in Italy course, and it was going to be a group of retail students and a group of hospitality, retail, and hotel, restaurant, and tourism management students. And everybody knows that the pandemic hit. We weren't sure if we were coming or going. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to go or not be able to go. And I believe it was Magdalena, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe it was Magdalena who came up with the idea, or somebody in her office, to come up to do a virtual study abroad. We wanted to be able to give students that opportunity, and then very quickly propose this idea. So we already had the course, we had the syllabi. Both Karen and Sandy worked very quickly on transforming that with the help of Christina into a virtual study abroad, also with Jenna trying to figure out how to provide the same kind of, not necessarily same kind, but experiences that would immerse them into the culture. And so they did a great job. Proposed it, and the department chair in retail approved it, and the department chair in hotel and tourism management didn't approve it. He rejected it. The reasons that the retail approved it, they thought that it was rigorous enough, that it was a great experience. The person in hospitality felt like it would be a good experience, but that it didn't meet the needs of the school at the time. And one of the big issues that we were talking about was the cost, that he felt at the time that it didn't meet the goals of what he wanted, and that in his words, we would be taking advantage of the students because we would be selling something that wasn't really a travel experience. It wasn't an international experience. It was just an online class. The Sandy appealed that to my office. So both of them came to my office for me to review. I'm a very big proponent of this. I thought it was a wonderful idea. They're experienced. Both of Sandy and Karen had been to Italy many times. They've run this course before. They have a lot of connections there. Also, there was a strong commitment from the Education Abroad office and Jenna and Magdalena, as well as in my office with Christina, to do this the right way, to make sure that they had the right experiences, to make sure that it was rigorous. And so it came to my office. I approved it, even though the HRTM school director didn't approve it. He rejected it. And so I went to my dean for mediation. My dean was very much in favor of doing this. He wanted to do it, but because this was a school decision and a school director's decision, he thought that it was important to support the school director, and that he has to be that the school director is in charge of the curriculum, and that if he went against him on this situation, that they would dilute his authority on other curriculum issues. So ultimately, it was rejected, and we weren't able to do the HRTM one, and we did the retail one. The good thing about that, well, one of the positive things is that Sandy and Karen work really well together, so they were able to do the retail class together. And then ultimately, not because of this, but we got a new school director. So this other school director that came in was supportive. And so that's how the process worked for us. The course was amazing. We had great student evaluations. And I think that ultimately we were proven that it was a very successful course, and want to continue promoting that in the future. All right.
So we can go ahead and work through this together, but I wanted to go ahead and give our participants some of the same scenarios that you faced, that Karen and Sandy faced, that we faced in our office, and how we responded to that. And so David, you can weigh in as we go over each of these different scenarios. The first one, which David mentioned pretty early on, is that this isn't study abroad. And so this is a comment that we received a couple times as we were proposing what our virtual coursework would look like and how we could internationalize the curriculum. So we've always said we recognize that GLEs are not traditional physical travel, and we are still encouraging students to seek out physical traditional travel if their individual situations allow. So in the meantime, with limited physical travel, we have lower student budgets to invest in traditional programming, and there's just a general inaccessibility due to a variety of student needs that has always been underlying. GLE still allows students' minds to travel. So I'm going to go ahead and post a link in the chat. This is an article, and there are many. I choose this one for the specific quote. So the article from the conversation is titled, "Here's a New Way to Do Study Abroad During the COVID-19 Pandemic and Beyond." And what was really important to us is that this is not just a short-term solution, but rather sustainable programming. So the author outlines, among other reasons, that U.S. higher education must accept that there are other ways to educate students beyond the way it is done in the U.S. While the desire to ensure academic integrity is understandable, demanding that international courses, just like the ones already offered in the U.S., obstruct students from encountering other ways to teach and learn. And so virtual international coursework then allows for students to still receive these benefits. And again, you can read more in the article there. David, I'm curious, what was the reaction that you had when you first heard from various stakeholders that virtual is not study abroad?
And I think that the answer is yes. It's not. It's not study abroad. They're not necessarily studying abroad, and they're not leaving their home to go somewhere else. And it's not equivalent. But just because it isn't equivalent doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or it's worse or that there's not a benefit from having this experience. And one of the things that trying to talk to the different stakeholders is that think about the opportunity this would provide for students that have accessibility problems that may not have the ability to study abroad. It also opens the door for students that may be scared initially to study abroad by giving them that first. Let's have some baby steps. Let's try it out. Let's give you that first taste. We have a lot of students that they've never left the state of South Carolina, and so this would give them a little bit more comfort to have that ability. Also, maybe for our students, low income or first gen students, just don't have the financial resources to have it. Yes, nothing is going to replace going to another country and having that experience. Will never argue with that. But this has its benefits and it has its place, and especially right now when we don't have the ability to travel, it is a great alternative for what we're doing. So that's the argument that we have, and even though I say this, there's still people that don't agree with me, and so but it is true, and that's one of the at least the way that I frame it is that you're correct, it isn't, but here are the other things that are wonderful about it.
Thanks for weighing in, David. The next one is about cost. So David mentioned this one as well. How much is it going to cost? Which is my favorite question when it comes to our global classroom programs, which are the physical faculty-led travel programs, because the answer is always the same, and it's that it depends. So the program fee can be entirely non-existent, which is what happened with our pilot back in May. Students did not pay an additional program fee, and that's because Carrie and Sandy were able to use those pre-existing international partnerships, personal connections, and collaborative teams across campus, CTE, distributed learning, our office, CL, and so on. If you do choose to go with a third-party logistics provider, then we have seen a total lump sum of program costs, and that's for putting together virtual tours, guest lectures, and so on, about $1,000 to $2,000, and it's a lump sum. And so that means that either the department can be tasked with paying for this if they can budget for it, or if not, which is more common and what we see with our global classrooms generally, is that this will be spread evenly across students as a program fee. So even with just 15 students, you can have a program fee that equates to around $100. I talk about pricing also because since GLEs are study abroad approved, they are experiential approved, as long as they go through our correct processes, which they have to in order to have all of these recognitions, then they can also be priced for in-state tuition. And so a lot of times for students, that means that if they have to pay an additional program fee, it still makes experience cheaper for them because they do have that in-state tuition. So they can still receive the benefits of a globally focused course without having the same financial burden of physical travel. The next one I want to touch on is where's the engagement? So David, I'm sure that you'll have some things to say about this one as well, because this kind of goes hand in hand with our first statement of this isn't study abroad. So what is happening behind the scenes? And how is this different from traditional? So we talked a little bit about this in our last session, but this is a question that is still being posed to faculty as they propose and as they bring this to their departments. Ultimately, experiential learning and engagement is inherent when physically studying abroad, but there does have to be more thought and planning for GLEs to create moments of engagement. So this is where you want to rely on those campus partners we mentioned, international partners, and us, to build in that engagement and experiential learning. So for instance, how can you incorporate language practice in a meaningful way? Do you have an international partner that's in France, say, if you're trying to do a language exchange between French and English? Students can meet up one-on-one. And so being able to give those concrete examples to the department may help in their approval. Along those same lines, our office is also working on approvals with our official proposal system. So all global classroom programs have to go through an official process where they're reviewed by OPAC, or Overseas Approval Committee, and so they still have to go through that same process. On top of that, CL is also going to be reviewing them. So by the time they are approved by both our office and CL, that we can be confident the programming and the curricula meet the needs of students and for experiential learning and engagement.
So Jenna, I wanted to add something about the cost.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that that faculty talk about is it doesn't they're having to pay extra, or that there's a potential additional fees, and my response to them is that most classes have additional fees. If you have to buy a scientific calculator, sometimes that fee is going to be higher than they would for you to have this experience. So all costs, and the one thing about it is that these courses aren't required classes. It's not like you're forcing students to do it. And I think the important part is that you just have to be upfront about it. One of the cool things that we've been able to do in our college this year is that we're allowing students to get scholarships for virtual study abroads, so that they can use that to offset some of those additional costs if there's there. So I think that we should open up that opportunity for other students as well. So yes, there may be some costs, but there's costs in all of this that we do, and if we want to do it right, we have to make sure that we have to work with our partners, and they have to benefit from it as well. So there may be a cost, but most classes have costs.
That's a good point. I think about something Karen, Sandy, and I talked about in when we were concerned that there might be a cost associated with their course, and they pointed out that if students had to pay for a book even, that would probably be the equivalent of what their course would cost. Ultimately, they didn't end up having a program fee, which was great for students, but that was something that we had talked about. So if you can offset costs by having digital materials, digital books that are available, and then charging a program fee that is around $100, it does come out even. So what happens if your department just says no? And so David covered this a little bit. It can happen, and ultimately we know that rejections will occur. They occur already with our global classroom programs, and we want to make sure that we have departmental support. So if you're not approved to offer a GLE for this coming Maymester, say, then please don't be discouraged and try again, like we saw with the pilot programs. HRTM did not approve this, but it's very likely that going again this year, they will. Sometimes it's just a case of departments wanting to see how other GLEs happen, what other programs are doing. And so if you do receive a no, there is the appeal process, which David talked about, but there's also just something to be said about trying again in the future.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that it's great to have, the workshops that we're having right now are wonderful because I think part of it is education. A lot of people just don't know and don't understand. Anytime things are new, it's great that I have Karen and Sandy. They're early adopters, so they're jumping on it. They're going to be wonderful, but a lot of people don't, and so we have to educate, and we need to have ambassadors like Jenna and like Christina who go out and talk about this. And the thing that's amazing is that you talk to our international partners. We had a meeting with our with a partner in Ecuador, and they're all about it. They want to do it. They know that they need to do this. So I think that people are going to start to realize that this is something that's going to happen. If they want it or not to happen, it's going to happen. So no, it's going to happen, but just try to educate, have them, I wish that more people were taking advantage of these workshops, but that I know it's a slow process, but make sure the educational process is critical, the ambassador process is critical, and then having them talk to their international partners will show that this is something is important and something that we're all doing.
All right, so we have our first question. Where or how can we meet with other, I'm assuming this is professors, interested in doing a GLE so we could adopt the same one? I please feel free to correct me if I'm reading this wrong, but you're looking for other faculty who are interested in maybe the same department. And so I would say our Blackboard is a great resource. I'm also happy to connect you with anybody who's reached out from your department because I have a running list of this year as well as all of the previous years in which faculty have led global classrooms. And then I'm also finding out which ones are converting their programs to virtual programming. So if you're interested in how you can meet with other faculty who are doing GLEs generally, then this is the place. Coming to our mini series, as well as our Blackboard. Magdalena put in here, those colleges within the university also have a designated international coordinator. If you are at a different campus, then we can definitely put you in contact if you have a designated international coordinator. But if not, then you're welcome to come through our office to find those connections.
You can also, as Sandy and Karen are both here, they've led them. So just to get the little bit of an idea. They're wonderful to work with. Both of them are Garnet Apple excellent teachers that I'm sure they'll share that information with you. Also, my international programs director, Christina Budd, is on here as well. She helped facilitate part of this. She's happy to provide assistance that you might need as well. So just use the current resources that you have here. I think they'd be more than happy to help.
All right, great. And we'll have time for more questions at the end. So we'll go ahead and move on with our presentation. So Laura, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. So as Jenna mentioned, to make sure that there's engagement and reflection happening in these courses, our office will also look over them for approval. So I wanted to talk about our approval process a little bit and what we're looking for and kind of contextualize it in experiential learning and graduation with leadership distinction, because this all kind of fits together. And the more you know about all of those, then the more you can encourage your students to engage both within the study abroad and beyond. So all of study abroad courses fit as also qualified to be experiential learning courses or experiential learning opportunities. So they're already under a blanket approval process approved. So this course, Global Learning Experience, would also be approved as an experiential learning opportunity. And just as a reminder, all of these ELOs go on students' My U of SC extended transcript as a record of all of their beyond the classroom engagements at USC. So this is something that they can share with employers or grad school to show how they were engaged during their time at USC. So these are the requirements for any kind of experiential learning opportunity. So if you have another kind of course where you have students engaging beyond the classroom 45 hours, you could also think about submitting that to be an ELO. So we look for a minimum of 45 hours of engagement, and that can include preparation for that engagement and reflection on that experience. We look for clear expectations for what exactly students need to do. And then reflection. So how are students reflecting on what they've done outside of the classroom, reflecting on their engagement through maybe journals or blogs or papers, presentations. This can also, doesn't have to necessarily be done written. This can also happen in meetings with like in class meetings or in one-on-one meetings with the facilitator of the experience. And then we also want them to receive feedback on how they're doing in their engagement, as well as their reflection. So we look for some kind of substantial feedback on what they're doing. So that is how, just generally, any kind of credit or non-credit beyond the classroom experience can be an experiential learning opportunity. So specifically for global learning experiences, just as we do with ELOs, we look for at least 25 hours of real world experience. So students are, if this were not virtual, they would be out doing something for 25 hours. But for the virtual context, that they're engaged in tours, they're interacting with native speakers, they're engaged with interviews, they're actually doing something that's like a real world experience for 25 hours. And then we look for reflection and feedback, just like with the regular ELO. And then also, because this is virtual and because it's maybe harder for them to see how this all fits together, we look for a culminating project where they can take everything they learned through their global learning experience and apply it in a new context. So if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, this would be the last step. So where they have to take all the pieces of what they learned, find the connections in those pieces, and then put together something new. So they're applying, analyzing, evaluating, and building a new whole, or you could say solving a new problem with what they've learned. So some examples of what that could look like. They synthesize all of their learning, and then they write a manual about what they learned about. They put together a business plan. This is the last example I stole from Karen and Sandy. So develop a post-COVID-19 business recovery plan. So how, now that you've seen how Italy maybe has been hit by the pandemic, what would you suggest they do to recover? Examine a problem, develop a plan of action for a community, pretend like you're writing a proposal for city council. Maybe you really could even write that proposal with recommendations for improving bike lanes in a city or bike safety, something like that. So these are just some examples to give you an idea, and I'm sure you can think of ways that this would fit into your specific context and your discipline. But just to give you an idea of what we're looking for in terms of the culminating project at the end of the global learning experience. And hopefully you'd have maybe small assignments that kind of build up to this culminating project. So this all then, so if students participate in a global learning experience, this can also qualify for as part of their hours for graduation with leadership distinction. So I just, again, wanted to contextualize that within this larger, the ELO, experiential learning opportunity, within the larger context of GLD. And hopefully you all have heard about it, but this is an acknowledgement of what students have done both within and beyond the classroom. It's recognized on their transcript and on their diploma, and what students really like, in addition to all the great learning that happens, is they get these honor cords at graduation. So we have 5 pathways in GLD: community service, diversity and social advocacy, global learning, professional and civic engagement, and research. And the one, of course, that is most applicable to what we're talking about now is global learning. So for global learning, students need 12 weeks of study abroad, or 8 weeks of faculty-led study abroad, or 6 weeks of faculty-led study abroad plus 60 hours of some kind of local international experiences. And now with this new global learning experience, we will let up to 2 weeks of a global learning experience count 1-to-1 basically for a faculty-led. So if students participate in either 2 one-week experiences or 1 2-week-long Maymester global learning experience, then they just need another 6 weeks of a faculty-led study abroad, or 4 weeks if they go with the local international experience. So we debated about how many weeks do we want to accept, and is it 1-to-1, or how exactly does it count? And we still do want students to go abroad, even though I know it's difficult right in this moment, but we feel like to get the global learning, to pursue that pathway, they really need to have at least been abroad. But hopefully this will give students a little more leeway. They can participate in one of these experiences, and then maybe next summer when things are better, they can get the rest of their study abroad. So that's the core experience for the global learning pathway, and then the other components are similar to, or the same as the other pathways. They need 3 enhancement experiences, which could be going to a presentation, something beyond the classroom that has to do with their pathway, a workshop, job shadowing, 6 credit hours of coursework with a GLD approved course. They give a presentation. Normally students do this at Discover USC, and then they complete an e-portfolio, which is where they put all of their learning together. And so this, I'm mentioning this because this is where the actual integrative learning happens. So at first I talked about experiential learning, which is sort of a component, but then if you do a lot of different experiential learning, you have a lot of different experiences to think about to integrate all together, which is where the integrative learning happens. So if you have students who are participating in GLD, or if you can help to encourage them to do that, this is what happens at the end of their college career when they try to put it all together. They think about what they've done within the classroom, the concepts, frameworks, theories they've learned in their classes, and then they think about what they've done beyond the classroom. So in this case, it would be their study abroad if we're talking about global learning, and the global learning experience, and find the connections between those things. So you may have noticed in your classes, a lot of times students, they learn a lot in a class, they go abroad. If you've ever led study abroad, they learn a lot there, but then they don't see how those things connect. So I've done a lot of study abroad in Germany, and when I try to get students to think about what we experienced in Germany and what does that have to do with what you've talked about in your class with literature and culture, it's a stretch for them to make that connection without some help. So this is what they're doing in their e-portfolio, but the more they can do this before they get to the end of their college career, the better. In this e-portfolio, there's an About Me section where they introduce themselves. There are 3 key insights where they're actually making these connections, and then a leadership section, which is similar to that culminating project in the global learning experience, where they take everything they've learned and think about how they would solve a problem in the future. So this is where they show that they're a leader in their field and in their discipline, because they have these insights that they now can use to solve a larger problem. And there are artifacts throughout the insights where they show their learning that they that took place while they were at USC. So that's sort of how the global learning experience fits into the larger context of GLD, and sort of the thinking that we're trying to get students to start as early as possible, because the sooner they think about making connections between their courses to future careers, between what they're doing outside the classroom and throughout the curriculum, then the better off they are, I think.
So I wanted to go ahead and wrap up today's session with how to go through our proposal process. So the way that we design this session is that you get of what the departmental approval process looks like, since that is one hurdle for faculty members, what the CL process looks like and what those requirements are, since some faculty may find that daunting. And then finally is our own process, so that we can just make sure that everything is as clear as possible. So before you even propose a GLE, there are some questions that you should be considering, and we have a guide for you that's in the Blackboard to help you with this process. So in our Blackboard organization, I have it circled here, there is a tab on the left called Steps to Lead Abroad. And this is meant to walk you through where you should be in creating a global classroom program, but now also with a global learning experience. And so if you have led a global classroom program in the past, you'll see a lot of this is very similar, and I'll go ahead and point out what those differences are between these two processes. So first, you'll need to decide which course you can foresee converting to a GLE. This could be a course that you currently teach at U of SC or even a previous global classroom that you've led. As David mentioned earlier, you'll need departmental approval. So you'll need to check in with the department chair and your dean first. During these planning stages, you'll also want to determine if you will be working with a third-party logistics provider, international agreements within your department, or other connections. As we saw in the pilot from last week's session, the faculty leaders' prior connections allowed them to put together free synchronous and asynchronous materials. Ultimately, this does require more work on the behalf of those faculty for our office and others across campus, but it also means that students are able to participate without a program fee. So if you determine at this point in your planning stages that you'd rather work with a provider, there will be at least some sort of program fee for your students or for your department, depending on what your budgeting looks like. You can visit our budgeting page on Blackboard, which is also in that left navigation, if you do think that you are going to go with a third-party logistics provider. You should also start thinking about how your syllabus will change. So Laura just covered all of the ELOs that are required for what GLEs look like. Our next session on November 20th will also help you workshop during that time an already existing syllabus. So you can bring with you a syllabus or a course, again, that you teach already at U of SC or that a global classroom that you led in the past. So you can look at the CL tab. We have one dedicated in our left navigation as well in Blackboard, and you can find the GLE requirements folder. In this folder, you will have information on deadlines for proposing, as well as the document that we featured last week, which gives you a hands-on look at what mandatory activities that we have and also possible activities. That includes orientation, reflection and feedback, the culminating project, tours, and so on. So the next step, in step 2, and this is where I think most of the differences are going to appear, you'll have the proposal itself in this step. So you'll need to answer some logistics questions within the proposal, such as what is your course called and what are the dates of your program? What is the program fee if you have one? Typically, there's a brief description of how you can say to your students that you're marketing towards, this is what my course is going to cover, what your learning objectives are, and your experience as a leader. Since GLEs are not programs that physically travel abroad, you will not need to upload the typical insurance enrollment form, and you'll also not need to submit a detailed emergency action plan since students won't be physically going on excursions. However, you'll still need that signed program leader agreement, which indicates your department's approval and also your syllabus. The proposal will be sent through our typical review process, again with some differences. So your proposal will not be evaluated for health and safety of physical travel, since that's not applicable in this situation. However, you will still be assessed on the academic materials in your syllabus, such as required readings and how they match up with the course that you have proposed. So a 1-credit course will require a different level of readings than a 3-credit. 100 level will require a different level of readings than a 400 level, and so on. Our typical review process occurs through OPAC. Again, that's our Overseas Programs Approval Committee. And OPAC is comprised of various faculty and staff across campus. They evaluate each program's academic, health and safety, and international components. So during the review process, if OPAC does not find they can approve a program, they offer suggestions and ask questions to guide proposing faculty to fulfill their requirements. In addition to typical OPAC review processes, you will also need to clearly indicate that your proposed course meets the requirement that Laura mentioned of the 25 hours minimum of experiential learning as accomplished through mandatory and possible activities. The Blackboard GLE guidelines also has a table. It's at the very bottom of that page, which you can insert into your syllabus to showcase your experiential activities. If you do not choose to use this table for review purposes, you'll want to include the same information that would be included in the table somewhere in your syllabus alongside those activities, or you may even want to submit a supporting document that explains how activities meet these various benchmarks. And so that table is the breakdown of experiential activities, which is at the bottom of this page. The highlights there are examples and where you will be able to total up the time. So for instance, going back to our pilot, an example of a task or activity that is experiential is that the students may attend a synchronous guest lecture set in an Italian winery. The time of that entire activity is also including the prep, reflection, and follow-up. So between the actual guest lecture itself, as well as reflections and preparation that went into planning for this activity was 2.5 hours, for instance. And then you can also outline how those pre and post activities went alongside your synchronous or asynchronous activity. We suggest that you allow for about 6 months between your proposal submittal and your start date. We will be accepting GLEs for Maymester until January 15th, which will allow for faculty and staff to be trained in GLEs during sessions like this and plan for their GLEs accordingly. However, especially if you are a third-party logistics provider, we want to be sensitive to the processing time of contracts for these partners. And so that's typically around 6 months. And so that's why we want to make sure that we have about that amount of time for proposal to come in and be reviewed.